We weren't drinking whiskey this whole episode.
I know, dude. As soon as we started, I was just like, "Should we stop and get this?" And I was like, "Yeah, we're on a roll. Let's keep
Actually,
going."
we sounded much more cohesive, so maybe we don't drink anymore.
Hey everybody, it is episode 233. It is our final show of 2019, and usually during this time of the year, things are winding down, I guess, except if you work in retail, then it's a bunch of last-minute shoppers. But we still have some news to cover, so let's get into it. Last week, I opened the show talking about the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act being in jeopardy, and we also talk about it in this week's podcast. Well, some hopes have been answered, and the tax cut has been approved and extended for one additional year. It has passed in both the House and the Senate, so now craft distillers can take advantage of one more year tax breaks. So we'll see what's going to happen in 2020, if it'll be furthered again, or if it's now time for craft distillers to start preparing for a 400% tax increase in 2021. If anything has the word Weller associated to it, there's bound to be some hysteria that follows. This past week, a new Weller single label that was orange hit the TTB. This caused a bunch of memes to spread like Weller Pumpkin Spice, Weller Honey, and even a Weller Jaundice. I'm not too sure who thought of that idea, but the market needs new excitement every single week. Now, there are no public details from Sazerac on this line, so it's still yet to be determined when or even if it will ever be released, the proof, and the price point. On the Bourbon Pursuit side, we're finishing out 2019 with a bang. For the past few weeks, we've been lucky enough to select 2 more single barrels for our Patreon community. 2 weeks ago, we traveled down to Lynchburg, Tennessee to select a barrel-proof Jack Daniels. And to my surprise, these whiskeys, they're only 5 years old, but we ended up choosing a barrel that was 131 proof and just completely floored us on taste and complexity. It was also a good time just talking to a lot of folks that worked there because it was truly an all-encompassing experience with humble people who just love what they do. And we did our best not to get into those Jack Daniels bourbon conversations with anybody that works there because we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. And this week, or should I say last week, we traveled down to Buffalo Trace and selected our first ever Eagle Rare Barrel. And to keep the story short, we had our team of 10 people along with Susanna, who leads the barrel program, with Joshua Steely, who manages the premier bourbon brands, and the infamous Freddie Johnson. It was a split decision all the way to the very end, where Joshua and Freddie ended up being our tiebreakers. You can read the stories for both of these pick experiences with the link in our show notes, and these barrels will only and always be exclusively available to our Patreon community. And thank you, as always, to our retail partner, Keg and Bottle, for making it happen. You can read more about them and order whiskey online and have it shipped to your door at keg.bottle.com. And not only that is, we're starting out 2020 with even more barrel selections. We have our first 1792 foolproof selection happening on the 3rd of January. So go to our Patreon page, check it out to see all the single barrels that we have lined up and the ones that will be coming in. As I look back and I reflect on 2019, it's been a monumental year of growth for the podcast, but it was also the launch of our Whiskey Quickie series. We selected 19 single barrels from various distilleries. We released 17 episodes of Pursuit series, and the podcast, it reached a new milestone of 950,000 downloads in 2019. So thank you, all of you out there that listen and support this podcast. We just couldn't do it without you. We decided to celebrate for this very special occasion and buy some new equipment to help you even bring better quality in 2020. So we can't wait to start recording all new podcasts with the new gear coming in. In today's podcast, it's going to be more about looking back at 2019 reflections, but also looking into 2020. What was our whiskey of the year? And what do we think is going to happen with things like TTB labels, marijuana, tariffs, the 3-tier system, and more in 2020? We cover it all in today's podcast. But first, sit back, relax, and let's listen from what Joe has to say over at Barrel Bourbon. And then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Joe Beatrice, founder of Barrel Craft Spirits. Myself and our master distiller, Trip Stimpson, spend weeks choosing barrels to create a new batch. We meticulously sample every barrel to make sure the blend is absolutely perfect. Next time, ask your bartender for Barrel Bourbon.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. This week's idea comes from Jess, or Blonde Ambitchin, on Twitter. Great handle, by the way, Blonde Ambition. Kind of jealous of that handle. She asked, what's the average char for a barrel? Now, it's interesting. This is something that the distillers, they tend to be very emphatic about their belief in the charring of the barrel. As you know, by law, every barrel has to be newly charred oak in order for it to store bourbon. And there have been a lot of experiments over the years, to include Buffalo Trace's experiment for their experimental line that they stored whiskey in a barrel that was charred for nearly like 2 minutes, and the barrel barely held together. So you can't really have a barrel that's charred for more than a minute and a half in order to have like decent volume come out of it. So the average char that most people use and that they've found that they derive the best flavor for them is usually about a char number 4 or 55 seconds. You'll also hear it called the alligator char. Now, you're finding a lot of people really kind of live by the char number 3. Char number 3 is, in that 45 second to 50 second range, and it gets people a lot more durability out of the barrel, but the wood also gets, when that whiskey gets deeper down there in that line, they tend to come out a little earthier. And I've seen some people do a char number 2 and a char 1, and to be honest with you, those whiskeys tend to be a little greener. You find a lot of like astringent notes, and I have typically not been much of a fan of those. Of course, all that is to say that at the end of the day, charring plays a far littler role into the flavor of the whiskey than the leaving the staves outside and letting them dry age or the toasting mechanisms. So I think the charring, while important, is not the most important aspect of the barrel. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you have an idea for Above the Char, hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or wherever the hell you want to. At Fred Minnick, just email me on my website, fredminnick.com. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to the final episode of Bourbon Pursuit for 2019. Kenny, Ryan, and Fred down here in is somewhat of a new setup for us. So we're trying to invest in some new equipment, make it sound better, make everything kind of work. So
yeah. Waited till the very last episode, the year to get some new equipment.
Well, we're I keep looking at all the Fred stuff that he has in his new setup, and I get jealous. I really do. I get jealous and envious now.
You got mic envy?
A little bit. It's a little bit of mic envy. It is.
Well, at least you know how to turn it on. It took me a while to figure out how to use that damn thing.
Yeah.
It's all right. We'll get there. But today what we're going to do is we're going to be going over kind of like a recap of some of the favorite things that we did or we saw or a part of in 2019. Also looking into 2020 with some predictions and some kind of ideas that I kind of have, and we'll take it from there. And one thing that some data just recently came out. There are now 800,000 podcasts that are out there now, and it's an astounding amount. And we just want to say thank you to the listeners out there.
They're not all bourbon, are they?
Well, I mean, there's probably a new one every other day.
I know. Feels like it. There's 800,000 other ones now.
But want to say thank you to all of our listeners out there because we definitely appreciate it, and hopefully you continue listening to us more as we go into 2020. But what's kind of one thing I want to kind of look at is kind of reflect back on 2019 a little bit, like. Fred or Ryan, I'll let you kind of dive in, or I'll kind of say a few of them. Like, did you have an episode that you were really happy about, or you were proud about, or really got a lot out of?
You want to take this, Fred, or you want me to go?
We had so many great ones. I really enjoyed getting Matthew Raywalt on here, Aiden English from WWE, and the reason why I love that is, inevitably you're going to have new people come into kind of like the media spotlight and everything for whiskey. And I applaud that. I want to see new people coming in and giving their opinion about whiskey and kind of like furthering the story of what we know whiskey is and who enjoys it. And to have like someone of that caliber who's on TV like every week and body slamming people, I just think that's kind of cool. And we've become pretty good friends, and I just think what he has done for whiskey and continues to do so is fascinating. And I also, and it's not just because she's one of my best friends, but the Peggy No Stevens episode that you and I did at her place.
Well, notice most of those I was not a part of.
Well, we were mentioning this earlier. It's very rare that all three of us are together.
It is.
And I think it's because, it's kind of like when the president goes on the stage to talk, you need to have one of the people in the back just in case a grenade drops or something.
Too many chiefs.
Yeah.
There's going to be one designated survivor of BPB around here. Is that what it is?
But the Peggy No Stevens episode to me was like, she revealed a lot of things there that was, she didn't have to. And, I wrote the book Whiskey Women, and I think she was a reason why I wrote it. She was a trailblazer in this world. And then on the other side, Jackie Zykin, whom we all three were there with, we were all there.
That was a fun one. She's always great.
She's great, and Campbell was great. And, I just got to tell you, we had a lot of fun this year. In every episode I was a part of, and, it was just fantastic for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the ones I really enjoyed the most, as Ryan and I started venturing off into our own little side business as well with Pursuit Spirits, but as we started really kind of like turning a new chapter for Bourbon Pursuit as well, like we're not just interviewing master distillers, and it's not all cultural, but we're looking at even like further behind the curtains of things, and that's when we did episode 182 with Jeff Hotmeyer of Brindiamo, and really talking about like what's the secrets behind sourcing whiskey. Like we all knew that there was source whiskey out there, but not a lot of people knew the process, what it takes. God, remember he talked about like the whole like a counterfeit full of, or a whole truckload full of like counterfeit rum potentially, right? I mean, like there's a lot of things that a lot of people just didn't really know about it beforehand.
Yeah, that was kind of like that broke a little news in our world for a broker to come out and say that there's counterfeit bourbon out there and someone's bottled it and we don't know who. And as a consumer, it's kind of like it kind of goes back to that old adage: really only buy from people you trust, and like that's why the distilled and bottled buy, or like a source purveyor like the Pursuit series.
We do our best.
What's that?
But, that opened a lot of eyes, I think. And, yeah.
I totally agree. What about you, Ryan? Do you have a favorite one from this past year? Or maybe the most awkward one?
Well, I think everyone knows which the most awkward one was. But
do tell. I don't know which one you'd be referring to.
With the counterfeiter, which... I mean, that probably is. It was awful doing it at the time because it was so awkward. But as Fred and I talked about with other people, and I think it did bring us three like a lot closer. And because you had some people taking shots at us and questioning and all that stuff. So we kind of bonded over it. So that, and I think a lot of people enjoyed it as well. Kind of shine some light on a dark subject of this hobby, and hopefully deter some people from doing it. But probably my most like memorable and fun one. I always am amazed by the business aspect of this, and like I really enjoyed the one we did with Cave, just because I've started businesses, myself, and on a much smaller scale than he had with Rabbit Hole, and like this guy was literally leveraging his everything to make it happen, and you could just tell like. It was about to come to fruition, but it hadn't yet. And later we found out that, they were purchased by a Pernod Ricard. And it was just fascinating for me to hear, because it's ballsy to come into Kentucky where you have the most, you have the big boys and literally and you have no connection to the industry whatsoever. And you just start a brand and succeed like that. It's pretty incredible. So.
And I wasn't on that interview, but Cave is someone who definitely came in and, he made some enemies in the process as well. And like he kept pushing forward in his way. And so that story is fascinating. For that reason, he got like one of these big entrepreneur organizations. He got Entrepreneur of the Year for the whole country. So like he's he caught a lot of people's attention nationally.
It is impressive. And, speaking on the business side of things, like one of the ones that both of you were not there for, but I was the one dealing with episode 223 with Ken Lewis and New Riff, and really hearing his story of how he just kind of like just randomly got into the liquor business, and then he eventually sold off the party sources that now become liquor barns in Louisville. Now he just has that one. He had that one location and said, you know what, I want to get into the actual distilling process and everything like that. And then kind of talked about how when he was actually at the party source, how he bought all these barrels of MGP, just saying like, hey, like, I don't know, maybe I'll do something with them one day. And, you know, lo and behold, that's really what kickstarted everything that happened in New Riff. And they did a clean cut from OKI to their own product. There was no blending or anything like that. And they're not sourcing anything else. It's just moving towards their product. And, you know, and they've had a strong 2019 as well, even going into it from that side.
Man, think about how good their whiskey is too.
Oh, no.
You know, and they just kind of came out of nowhere for a lot of people. I mean, we've known about them for sure, but for a lot of people, they're just like discovering New Riff, and they're like, oh my God, this is good. And so that story too is like, it's so rare in whiskey that we see someone who gambles it all and then their whiskey's good.
Yeah.
You know, usually it stinks.
We see most of them that don't succeed. You know, we get
You're like, oh man, I'm sorry you spent your whole life savings on this.
to make this. Sorry about that, but no, it's hard for me to remember what episodes got released this year because we record some and some get released, and so I'm like, you know, just thinking back because if you're not familiar with our process, we batch record. I know you're familiar with it, but the audience. We batch record these things
to me.
6 months in advance and kind of release them as we go.
And just so the audience can know and feel sorry for Ryan and I, we've just been bullied into like that we have to plan for the next quarter.
Oh, I know.
Right after this. And it's like we have to come up with new episodes, and he's been trying to schedule. Kenny's been trying to schedule this with us for a long time, and
we have a whole syllabus of stuff, you know, like coming up after the show.
I mean,
get your copies at the door. Have a seat. We're gonna go over this.
What's your? Here's a question for you, Kenny. What is your what's your favorite moment of trying to get Ryan and I to do something?
Probably when I get to call y'all names, I'm like, "Will you bastards finally look at these text messages?" I'm trying to get answers out of
I'm trying
y'all.
to plan the calendar for January and February, and I'm like, I'm at Disney World, dude. Chill out. I'll be back home soon.
Oh no, but I mean, like I said, finally, like when I get those, I feel like I'm just. It's always waiting, and then as soon as I get it, I'm like, okay, bam, I can start knocking things out, start getting everything ready. Yeah, there's a whole process behind it. I just got to make sure that we're.
You got to add like 2 weeks buffer, you know, when you try to get stuff done with us too.
You're right. But I applaud you for your
persistence.
tenacity,
Yeah,
you know?
the pursuit pays off.
Yo,
There we go. There we go. So let's go ahead and let's start, looking into, actually, I want to kind of talk about this too, because I don't want to talk about best bourbons of the year. I don't know, I know Fred's going to be recording his, we're recording this here about 2 weeks prior to this actually being released, and Fred's going to be releasing his best bourbons and best whiskeys of 2019. Ryan, I kind of want you to kind of talk about this too, but I think 2019 was actually a very, very good year for American whiskey and bourbon. And I actually wrote down every single limited release and everyday bourbon that got released too. And I'm just going to go through these really quickly because I want just to say like just the gravity of really what went out there. And as soon as I say these things, you'll be like, oh yeah, that was actually introduced like back in February. Now I kind of remember this. So of course you've got the Antique Collection and you got Van Winkle, but you had Cornerstone Rye, Elmer T. Lee 100th, the Amaranth, Grain of the Gods, Four Roses 2019 Small Mash, Maker's Mark RC6, Angel's Envy Cash Strength, Knob Creek Quarter Oak, Double Eagle Very Rare, Old Charter Oak Series, Angel's Envy Oloroso, Bardstown Bourbon Company with their Fusion, Pfeiffer, Pavitt, and more. Bell Mead had some experimentals that came out. WB Saffel, 8 and Sand from MGP. Foregate had 4 releases this year. Blood Oath Pack 5. Old Carter had a few bourbons and ryes. Woodford Reserve Baccarat Edition. Woodford Reserve Batch Proof. Woodford Reserve Chocolate Malted Rye. Peerless Bourbon. Weller Full Proof 1792 12-year. King of Kentucky 2019. Baker's 13. Wild Turkey Cornerstone Rye. I got it on there twice, so maybe I take that one back. Old Forester Birthday Bourbon, Parker's Heavy Char Rye, Kentucky Owl Bourbon number 9, Stranahan's Snowflake 2019, Remus Volstead Reserve Bourbon from MGP. And those were all the limited releases. So now we go into just the everyday releases. Old Forester Rye, Cream of Kentucky. They had 2 releases this year: Four Roses Small Batch Select, Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond 7-year, Cooper's Craft Barrel Reserve 100 proof, Maker's Mark 100 proof, Uncle Nearest 1884 Small Batch, Whistle Pig Piggyback, Rebel Yell 100 proof, Woodford Reserve Wheat Whiskey, Dickel 13-year Bottle and Bond, Jim Beam's Legend Kentucky Owl Confiscated, Baker 7, and the Bullet Single Barrel program was also announced. And then you also had others like Barrel Dovetail, all the barrel releases, all the Basil Hayden Caribbean Rye. You had all of the Booker's batches. I mean, when I did a count, like we were.
So you're saying we have options out there?
It was like almost like 55 new entrants into the market this year of just limited releases, but there's also a good handful of just every other day stuff. So, in my opinion, 2019 was a fantastic year for American whiskey.
So there's two ways to look at this. One, yes, it was a fantastic year. The other way is that these distilleries are getting savvy about
Limited releases.
Yeah, every release is a new press release, is a new story somewhere. It's new, and so they're not just like saying like, okay, we got Woodford Reserve and Maker's Mark, let's go. Let's keep pushing that. So they've learned that the consumer base likes something new, special, and different. And so that's what that list tells me, is that some MBAs in the boardrooms have spotted that, and it's the strategy's working.
Yeah, and I think it also tells us that they're starting to catch up on their stocks of aging product. They're starting to you're starting to see like 7-8 year stuff getting pushed out there that finally they were 8 years ago they didn't have, and so I think they're able to catch up on it and start releasing some more stuff now.
I mean, and this was just from the big guys, right? Like this doesn't even take account the other 300 craft distilleries, or even maybe 3,000 craft distilleries there are across our nation now, right? So there's a lot of stuff that was released. And Fred, I kind of see what you're saying, that this could be a telling sign of what is going to come in 2020. Like we just named off maybe like 30 to 40 kind of like big kind of things that kind of shook up that. It's because it seems like every week that there's a press release and everybody's like, oh yes, I got to go get this one, right? I mean, even just last week, like pretty much everybody around here, we got the Larceny Barrel Proof and we got the Old Fitz 15 years, and it's kind of like, okay, like we're already gearing up for first of 2020 to go and find new bottles, right? So I guess that's just kind of maybe that's just a new evolutionary cycle that we're going to see.
And I would like to say, like, the question to me is like, you say that list and we know their strategy. I think what can be very telling is the pricing of each one of those is like, and the big winner of that entire list to me is the Old Forester Rye, coming in at $23. And that's just, and we know that Jackie Zykan kind of fought for that to be at that price point. And the other ones, like, what are their price points? I mean, they're hovering anywhere between 75 and 150. And so, a lot of these like new kind of products, they're not really pricing in, the old consumers who brought them to the dance. They're going for that new consumer who's like thinks that $75 is cheap.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. I mean, I think Ryan and I we had this conversation of even before we went in the car when we were just talking about Pursuit series, and we're talking about like, what happens if we run out of glass? Do we just like kill the brand and start a new brand? what do we do here, right? Yeah. So there's definitely, even on a very smaller scale, we have ideas and things to even think about, even when that happens. But Ryan, what about you? I mean, is there one of these like everyday ones that kind of like stuck out to you or anything like that? That's kind of like maybe one of your best whiskeys of 2019?
Yeah, I mean, Fred already mentioned the Old Forester Rye. I mean, it's so good. Like, I get it in pretty much when I can, every cocktail too. Like, it's good both ways. And then the Dickel Bald and Bond I thought was really excellent. And price great. And the blind tasting of the Heaven Hill Bald and Bond 7-year. Also proved that it's a very good, and at $40 is still
much to your chagrin, right?
Much to my chagrin, but it's really good whiskey, and it's $40. Like Fred said, most stuff that you got to get at that quality is like $75-$100. So that's it was good. So.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I guess this will be another question for you all. Like going into 2020, can you picture bigger brands trying to come out with more extensions that drive a price point even lower? Or do you think they want to create more extensions that create a higher price point to try and match some of the craft distillers, the sourcers, and everybody out there that can't make a price point as low as you can if you're actually distilling it and you own these barrels for since they were, basically born at that point.
Well, we had two market leaders come out with very low price points, Brown-Forman and Diageo. So Brown-Forman's Old Forester Rye, Diageo would be George Dickel Bottled to Bond. And those two kind of like under, let's say $30 or $40 price points, that was very telling to me. And then you saw Beam do that as well. Like they're not pricing
with the
high.
Legend.
Yeah, they're not pricing high. So I do think that there is a little bit of an effort to kind of make us think that they are pricing in that direction. Like Larceny's still like $25 for the most part in most places you go. But then their other things are like 150. So I think that what you're seeing is that you're seeing that they're going to always have something under $30, but they're going to start stacking the chips toward that $150 market. And I think we might start seeing the price go up more because the demand is there in the high affluent areas, the places like, Hollywood, places like Wall Street. So there's like a desire to have this, and that crowd just won't drink a $30 whiskey. They just won't. It's that's cheap. They're too good for that. And so if the bourbon industry does not price themselves to be competitive to Scotch for those money people, then they won't get them. And so that's kind of like their rationale behind a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you are seeing a lot of things that are pushing that $150 price point, and I can definitely see exactly why they would want to do it too. I mean, you have to push or kind of get those affluent people. I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, I always say for myself that I don't have a drinking problem. I've got a buying problem, and I will always be able to go, and if I find any limited edition bottle, like even if it's $150, I'll be like, yeah, I'll go ahead and get it. Like I just don't know. I mean, I have a bad urge to always buy stuff, right? That's just me. But at the same exact time, there's always going to be a lot of people out there in the bourbon world that are never going to pass up anything at a price point that is limited or anything like that too. So I don't know. We'll kind of see how that plays out in 2020. So kind of moving on a little bit here. So looking into 2020. So one of the things that kind of happened even recently, as of today, it's still kind of unfolding as we talked about that in 2019, there's been a trade war. We've had tariffs. We've had a lot of things going on that has really hurt bourbon in export interest. And we've talked about it plenty of times about how the export market is really where a lot of growth can be as soon as you start getting all the Scotch drinkers around the world to actually start seeing bourbon as a first-class citizen for them. And so there's been things that have already kind of progressed a little bit today. There's been some stuff with China, but we're not going to get too into politics here. But I kind of want to figure out, like, what do you all see on the roadmap or the horizon for this in 2020?
This is very scary. As we record this right now, I mean, there might have been something that came to fruition, but at the moment, in Washington D.C., the Craft Modernization Act is on the table to be renewed, and if it is not renewed, then craft distillers, I think, will have to
talk first. What is the Craft Modernization Act too? Because I know I've heard about it before I read it, but for everybody else that's out there,
I have no idea what it is.
So basically, this was
so you have a lemonade stand. They give you $5. No, I'm just kidding.
So to keep it, to give you like. The easy version is that a couple years ago they passed the Craft Modernization Act. They basically gave craft distillers, as defined by the government or ACSA's qualifications, that they would get less. They would pay lesser taxes than the big guys, and it gave them kind of a competitive advantage. And this was very, very important to them, especially as these tariffs were coming on and they were losing those like foreign markets because they couldn't afford to eat the 20 or 25% tariff that they were going to go overseas. And so there was a sunshine clause in that, which means that when this period is up, they're going to cut it or they're going to reevaluate it. And that period is up. And so now you have craft distillers who are looking, who've been, taking advantage of this tax and investing it back into their, this lack of paying taxes on certain areas. And they've been investing it back into their company. And when if that goes away, then they have to, there's like a 200-400% tax increase like right away on like excise taxes, and that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. Some of these guys have like big corporate support, like Woodinville does now, and Rabbit Hole and people like that. But for the most part, this is very dangerous. And from what I can tell, it is not going to. It may not pass. And the other thing is it also defined a lot of things in spirits, or in drinks. Like it defined mead. It gave like some definitions to mead. And there's also another thing that's happening kind of on the federal level is that they're trying to define what a barrel is, and that would eliminate basically the smaller barrels. And the craft distillers have, love them or hate them for it, but they've kind of defined their ways with those smaller barrels. And so I've always felt like there's a lot of like backdoor Washington stuff going on with the big boys, to try and kind of squash some of the little things. And because if you take away those smaller barrels, you basically eliminate probably a quarter to half of the craft whiskey distillers.
I guess kind of like a follow-on question to that is, you talked about investing into the business. You talked about being able to take a lot of that money. Do you see if this doesn't pass, like is 2020 going to be like the year of either sink or swim for a lot of these craft distillers then?
I do. I think 2020 is a very telling year. And if you don't have money, if you're cash flow short, this is going to be a bad year. Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is like just what you're starting to see, and you guys are a part of this in a little bit. You're starting to see like independent bottlers come in, and they are relieving a little pressure by going to these smaller distillers and buying up barrels. And so what you're seeing is like anybody who has some solid craft whiskey, they're actually putting stuff out on the market. So they're getting kind of a Band-Aid effect. They're not helping their brand, but they're getting cash flow by selling 15 barrels to Lost Lantern or 15 barrels to Bourbon Pursuit to bottle, or Pursuit series to bottle for an upcoming line. And so that's one positive for these guys is that there's a business model there that can help them. But if they're new, they're a little cash strapped. If they don't have aged whiskey, man, I wouldn't want to be on their shoes.
It's tough. What about you, Ryan? Do you see something that could happen with the export market like here? Do you think it's going to get better or worse?
Well, I guess it all really, it's so hard to predict with the election coming and everything. There's so much in the air. Like, nobody knows what's going to happen. And
I do know we're all going to need a drink with the election coming,
Yeah, exactly.
We're all aboard with that one.
It's just so, the waters are so unsettled there in Washington, on both sides. And so it's hard to predict anything with what we have coming in 2020. It's just like, let's all just be nice, in 2020. We're all bourbon brothers, and not let the politics divide us. But as far as exports, I have no idea because it's, I'm sure a lot of people are sitting back too, waiting to see what happens.
Yeah, I would think that something in the trade war needs to.
Did that sound like an educated response?
It sounded pretty educated. We'll let it pass. But for me, I kind of see this as I would like to see something change. We've talked about it before. I've seen the export market as could be the future of bourbon growth, and you don't want another whiskey glut era to say that a bottle of Bullet here in Kentucky or in the United States is $35, and then you go across the seas and then it's $75. When there's a bottle of Scotch for $50, nobody's gonna go and buy the Bullet, right?
Well, and I think right now, like remember Al Young said, well, even though we have issues with exports over there, we can fill a need here domestically. So, I think the need here domestically still is so much that it's not really going to affect too many people except for like Jack Daniels, who relies heavily on exports.
Yeah, that is true. They're losing like $125 million, but still for them, that's like one day of revenue probably. But it matters. It matters because the world stage, the conversation is like, it kind of goes back to really, the 1950s when these bourbon distillers were fighting to make bourbon a unique product to the United States and get exports overseas, is they were always coming up against a battle of like foreign governments saying like, you're not whiskey. You're not whiskey. Scotch is whiskey. And so a lot of this is a kind of, it's kind of an international battle that just hasn't stopped. And Scotch and bourbon brands, they're very closely knit and everything, but Scotch is dominant, and it is known as whiskey, and bourbon is just like a fraction of what they get. And I don't think that the bourbon brands will ever fully admit this, but they're jealous of Scotch and what they have done internationally.
It's like Kenny with your mic.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And they do it with used bourbon barrels. And so...
they're like, you got our dirty sloppy seconds.
Right. And so they want a piece of that. And that's all there is to it, but they're also not in a position to do it.
Yeah.
And so Al is very smart to say like, we can't do it overseas, so let's focus on domestic markets. I mean, that's the right move. I mean, I'd venture to say places like Boise, Idaho, and Bismarck, South Dakota is not right. That's South Dakota, right? Or is it North Dakota?
I don't know.
I think it's South Dakota.
I left my atlas upstairs.
So I'd venture to say that places like that, you might go into a random place and there's 5 bourbons. Why not make it 20?
Mm-hmm. All right, Ryan, I'll toss you a little softball here, right? Because one of the great conversations that we did have this year, we talked about marijuana and whiskey and whether they were going to have an impact on one another or anything like that. But this was actually something that Chris Hart had actually posted out on one of the forums and says, do you think we will see a marijuana or CBD infused whiskey in 2020? I mean, especially with all the states that are like kind of opening up legalization too, like there is a trickle effect happening.
CBD's in everything. So, you drive around here in Kentucky, I see signs like on every gas station, I think I saw like a mechanic shop said we sell CBD here or something. It's like there's signs everywhere.
Diversify.
But I don't know. I guess if it's legal, then yes, I think they will, because I've talked to people and they really seem, whether it's a placebo or not, they really think the CBD like works for them in whatever ailment they're trying to deal with. But Charbet is pretty close to doing it anyway, so why not
hop flavored whiskey?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure that it will taste good, but maybe I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, for me, it can't be called bourbon, right? Well, maybe, I don't really know, but can it be called bourbon if he doesn't infuse it? It really can't, because it's not really unless you're distilling with it, right?
One of the things that has been done is they take the seeds and they distill it in a like qualifies as a grain under the hemp rather, qualifies as a grain, as a seed on like some kind of USDA code. And so there have been people who have mashed it and cooked it and fermented it. And
I know MB Roland's one of those that had done that previously. But.
And then here's the thing about this. I've talked to a lot of marijuana people, and they don't really want this. It seems to me like, and I'm sure there definitely are people who within the weed business who want to see like infused alcohol. But most of the people that I talk to who are kind of like in the the luxury lifestyle of marijuana, like trying to like make it be like its own thing, they're like, pair it, but don't combine it. They would like to see marijuana become like a luxury good, or something that you would enjoy recreationally, like we do bourbon. And they don't like that. A lot of them don't like the idea of combining it with alcohol, because that perpetuates like a stoner or a drunken kind of
and it's hard to like
persona.
It interacts with somebody so differently,
Right.
And then you have the two, and it's like, well, how do you dose it, correctly? Say one shot for somebody might like make them trip out and like call the ambulance on themselves or something, whereas somebody else needs like 4. And so I don't know. It just seems like it'd be tricky to combine the two, because you can't really dose it out as well.
But Constellation invested billions into the business for a reason, and they're studying like how to get it to metabolize the same way as alcohol, because weed metabolizes differently than alcohol, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work. So someone's going to do it eventually.
Or the next best gummy.
I mean, so there's eventually it's going to happen. I mean, who knows?
I mean, I could see it happening. I mean, they're already infusing different kinds of sports drinks or anything like that with it. But alcohol is as we all know, a very heavy regulated kind of sector here. So, heck, if we can't even get shipping, much less just infusing it with weed. Oh gosh, So this is the other thing that I kind of got wind of this. We had a Patreon community person actually sent us a sample of this, and it was from Heritage Distilling. It was called BSB 103, and it stands for brown sugar bourbon. And it says this high altitude bourbon is flavored with natural brown sugar and cinnamon for a flavorful kick that will sure wake you up, whiskey aficionados looking to try something new. Also, it was only 60 proof and not 80. And this originally just went through the TTB, went through cola approval process, didn't really say much about it, right?
Wait, is it labeled as a liqueur or a flavored whiskey?
It says it's like the fanciful name is BSB 103. Okay. But underneath
it doesn't say brown sugar bourbon.
But it says like brown sugar bourbon and like letters and all, or it's what it says. And it was originally just called brown sugar bourbon is what it was originally called. And they had to rename it to BSB 103. And so, this isn't the first time, right? There's plenty of other instances where we've seen things just slip through the cracks. And
there's a bottle and bond like flavored whiskey a few years ago. I mean, it happens.
This is what keeps Wade interesting, right? This is what keeps him really pedal to the metal. So I guess do you all think that the TTB and just in 2020 in general, do you think it's going to even get more relaxed or more strict? With a career as a master distiller spanning almost 50 years, as well as a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer and having over 100 million people taste his products, Steve Nally is a legend of bourbon who for years made Maker's Mark with expertise and precision. His latest project is with Bardstown Bourbon Company, a state-of-the-art distillery in the heart of the bourbon capital of the world. They're known for their popular Fusion series. However, they're adding something new in 2020 with a release named The Prisoner. It starts as a 9-year-old Tennessee bourbon that is then finished in The Prisoner Wine Company's French oak barrels for 18 months. The good news is you don't have to wait till next year to try it. Steve and the team at Bardstown Bourbon Company have teamed up with Rack House Whiskey Club. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories that craft distilleries across the U.S. have to offer. Their December box features a full-size bottle of Bardstown's Fusion series and a 200 milliliter bottle of The Prisoner. There's also some cool merch inside, and as always, with this membership, shipping is free. Get your hands on some early release Bardstown bourbon by signing up at rackhousewhiskeyclub.com. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. Do you all think that the TTB and just in 2020 in general, do you think it's going to even get more relaxed or more strict? I mean, I know there's other laws that are on the books, but what do you kind of see as the head turner, page turner going to happen here?
I mean, it's with any government agency, it's resources. They probably just have limited resources, and it's with us, when we apply for any federal thing for pursuit series, whereas a transfer and bond or a state ABC, you submit it and you check back 3 weeks later, oh, we're still looking at stuff from 6 months ago that's submitted. And you're like, what? Stuff just moves slow just because they only have 2 people working in the office doing everything. So they're probably overworked, overwhelmed. So things just slip through. I think they'll follow the laws as best they can, but there's human error when, you have that. So
Yeah, there's definitely not a whole lot of automation takes place, even though I will say the TTB did start a new registering and COLA system in 2019. It did happen. So they have a new portal and stuff like that. But I think the back end work is still a very manual process. Fred, you're about to say something though.
I think for the most part, they do a good job considering that they have 5 people looking at all those labels, and God, that can't be easy. And everyone gets frustrated with them. And they're an easy target. But I always like to go back to the person who creates the label. What are you doing? I mean, you agreed to not perjure yourself. And if you put that through as bourbon on your application, then you're in violation of the law. And so, I think we sometimes beat up on the TTB, and rightfully so often. But here it's
you knew what you were doing. It's
I put the blame entirely on the applicant.
Well, and it's I noticed this other day, you kind of mentioned it, like separating, bourbon from whiskey category. Like, and I never really thought it was that big a deal until I went to the liquor store and you go look at the bourbon section and it's huge. And then the American whiskey section is like really tiny and it's off to the side and it's like it's not visible, from everything else. And so I could see why someone would work so hard to get that, or even just to slip by just to get that designation, because if you're right there in the midst of what everybody else is buying, versus being kind of off to the side in the American whiskey category, I can see where it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, whether you're coming out with like a wheat whiskey or an American whiskey, something like that, and yeah, you're not going to have the eyeballs because it doesn't say bourbon on the label, right? I mean, I think that's one of the big issues that we do see, and probably why there is so much entrance into the market. And you've got people playing with all kinds of different experimentations. I think I just saw an email this morning about 100% corn bourbon. I'm like, well, okay, I guess technically, it's bourbon, right? But it's just like, it's like we're playing with all different variations of this category to try and make sure that everything is still hitting that big B word on the label at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's funny. Well, like once upon a time, there was like a limit on like how much corn you can put in for bourbon, but I mean that went away a long time ago. But that would not have been considered bourbon back in the day.
Oh, I love listening to old Fred stories over here. It's like
another thing too.
Well, I don't think he was around when that
is like the barrel entry proof. If we were to go back to like 1955, more than half of the bourbons on the shelf today would not be considered bourbon. Mm-hmm. So.
Because it was what, like 107, 115 or something.
It was
like that?
110 was the legal maximum limit
difference
for barrel entry proof, and that changed in '62.
Speaking of barrel
taxes.
entry proof, do you think the reason success of New Riff and Wilderness Trail and others, because I guess Wilderness Trail, they have a higher barrel entry proof, but do you think lower barrel entry proof makes a difference? 1,000%.
I really do. I mean, and here's the thing: is it really good in certain. What I have noticed is it's really, really good between like 3 and 5 years old, and like anything after like 8. But that 6 to 8 years old, it can be really, really, really flat. The higher barrel entry proof can be fantastic up to 12 years old. After 12 years old, that clock is ticking because it seems somehow absorbs more wood. And Andrea Wilson from Michter's is the best person to talk about this. She breaks it down from a chemical aspect and everything. And as you know, Michter's is going in the barrel at 103 proof, which is the lowest in the industry. And to me, it's one of the more enjoyable conversations to have about whiskey, because I feel that not enough attention is paid to it, but yet there are a lot more people paying attention to it. And Wilderness Trail and New Riff, those low barrel entry proofs, absolutely making nice whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely making waves when you have that, because somebody tastes it and you're like, holy crap, this is a 4-year-old bourbon. Like, this is actually really good. Now, the one thing that you say you really like it, I say one of the downsides to it, it doesn't have, and maybe this is just because you think of like the Stag Juniors of the world, stuff like that. It doesn't have like that lingering and very long finish where something has like that hard spice to it or anything like that. Yes. Most of them like this like creamy, delicate texture.
That's exactly right. So you're basically looking at a style and a preference here. Like, do you like that butter style dripping down your jawline, or do you want to feel that, that's
punch in the face,
cinnamon or something? And here's the thing. I like all of them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how does that one feel on my palate? And you kind of like, it's just like, it's like football. There are running backs who will run you over and are amazing. And then there are running backs who will go left or right and you can't tackle them and they spin. And then there are running backs who all they're good for is catching a pass and blocking.
There's the Barry Sanders and the Jerome Bettises.
That's bourbon. Exactly right. And so like,
we're going to put that on a t-shirt, right?
They're all great. It's just like, what is your preference for your offense or for your palate in that moment?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely times when I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like to do like something that's, if I'm sitting there on the couch and I just want to do something that's like, yeah, like you said, very caramel, very buttery. Sometimes I'll reach for a dusty in that kind of aspect. Mm-hmm. And then there's sometimes I'm like, all right, we're going 120 proof and above right now. So yeah, there's definitely the kind of situational context for it too.
Right on.
So one of the things that we had talked about a lot in 2019 is we talked about the 3-tier system. We talked about shipping. We've talked about all these things, and this is and you know the Supreme Court case of the state of Tennessee with Total Wine and some other ones that were kind of enveloped in there, and how this is potentially going to open up the market for some change here maybe in 2020. So I kind of want to get your all's take on what is there going to be a shakeup in the 3-tier system? Could you foresee it happening? Are there too many lobbyists? Will the people revolt? Like, what do you all kind of see?
I think it's a ways away. You've asked me this 6 months ago. I thought we were close, and I just feel as the more I get into it, the more and more the big players involved are just digging in, and they're digging in hard, and they're not going to let this happen. I just feel like we got a ways to go on it.
I always go back to this, and this was in one of my Above the Chars a while back. 46 state attorneys general signed a letter and made it like kind of like their mission for 2020 to stop secondary sales on Craigslist, Facebook.
I just can't even believe that would be on their radar, and and them putting the efforts into that just shows me that they're like sticking in hard to the 3 system.
And it's not. It's not like they just like put out a press release. I mean, they were doing media. They were putting out detailed plans. They were setting up meetings with these social media entities. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm scared to death of my 5-year-old getting kidnapped in Target when my wife is going on Christmas shopping with him. And he's like stuck there by like trying to get in there because that's where human traffickers are. They're like in places like that. Why are we focusing on that? And yes, is there a potential that, there could be some kind of like poisoned alcohol out there? Yeah, there is. It's called in the hills of like Appalachia and places where people are making illegal whiskey. No one is getting, or illegal moonshine. No one is getting that in these like consumer facing forums. And the fact that they are using, they're actually coming out and they're citing Pappy Van Winkle right now. They're citing Pappy Van Winkle in these conversations. And the fact that they are doing that tells me that they don't get it. They don't understand that this is actually a consumer base that is really just supporting one another and not trying to, for the most part, not making money. It's people who are like saying they're in Maine or they're in Idaho and they got a buddy in Kentucky and said, hey, we have no Henry McKenna here. Can you give me a bottle? Something like that. And there's no effort whatsoever to support the consumer base from the brands, from the government, from the distributors, or anything like that. And that's my biggest problem here. Is like, if you want to take off, if you want to go after the secondary markets, fine. Okay, that's your hill. But what about like consumers who are really have fallen in love with this world, this bourbon world? We get an email every day from someone who just finds bourbon. They listen to the podcast. They want to learn more. They want to find more bottles. And what can we do for them now? There's not much. There's not a whole lot we can do other than like, here, read about this great whiskey, but you can never get it because you live in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah, I really want a shakeup to happen. And I guess one question I'll point to you back there, Fred, is when you talk about these attorney generals, do you think that this is somebody planting that seed in their head? Like, this has got to be a lobbyist that's happening for the distribution system, or maybe some of the major manufacturers out there that they're planting the seed in their head and they're kind of distracting them from really what they're putting forth their agenda, and not maybe the agenda of the people that are actually the consumers that really care about this.
Yeah. And there was also an op-ed in the Louisville Courier-Journal that was published on Repeal Day from a distributor here that said, "Happy Repeal Day, thank a distributor." So you started to see like some and he had a whole op-ed about why distributors are important, and they help you. Basically, they age gate, make sure alcohol doesn't get in the hands of kids and stuff. And
I'm glad they put it in a newspaper.
Yeah.
so only like 10 people are going to read it. Fantastic.
Hey now, come on now. Don't be hitting up newspaper. That's where I got my start. But so you're seeing, you're very much seeing an offensive. Whether it's a coordinated thing, I can't tell you that, but I do know that these are some of the same efforts that kind of took down a lot of the tobacco industry in the 90s. Meanwhile, while you have this going on, you also have this entirely you have a new group coming out saying like drinking is bad, advertising alcohol is bad, and so you have a growing movement of kind of like these consumer protectionist groups that are trying to ban things like advertising. They want to, we're just now seeing it on like YouTube. They're wanting to like rip down a lot of alcohol related things in social media. And so, and this is also a case of like a lot of the things that affect our lives are not government related. They're company related that we have really, we're really connected in. And so like if Facebook makes a policy and says no more alcohol sites, that in no way is violation of anything in the government. That's Facebook making a decision, and they could do it.
So I guess if you're a senator and you listen to this podcast, or you're a congressman, you want us to kind of we'll have the team go there and we'll get in front of Congress. We'll talk about the real issues here. So make sure that
we'll show the positive sides.
Here's the thing: is that Congressman Yarmouth would be very, very open to having a discussion with us. Mayor Fisher,
I do his yard. I'll talk to him about it.
Yeah, I mean, of course you do. But I mean, these are people who really would stand up for it, and would, because it impacts our state.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, I've said it before, being in tech, being able to see the transition of industries that just get disrupted because they rest on their laurels or they try to defend everything. Don't be a Kodak, don't be a Blockbuster, don't be one of these companies that just tries to try to maintain the status quo. And when you've got people and you've got companies that are out there that are figuring out ways that they can get around this, they can get around the distribution system, they can ship across states, they can do these things, all it's going to do is have a bigger trickle effect later on, and more people are going to catch on to it. I mean, we're all good friends with Blake over at Sealbox, and I think he's done an amazing job of how he has grown and matured the business a lot more in 2019 to the point where it's running like a very well-oiled machine now. And we talk to a lot of companies, and they're like, "How do you do it? Like, what do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, like we knew this like early on. Like we weren't going to be able to get to all 50 states, so." We looked at Blake, and he can get to more states than we could ever even try to do it. The, filing paperwork and waiting for things to come through and opening up distribution and then losing our ass on half the product because we have to pay 25% to somebody else, right? And so now people are like, oh, that's how you did it. So now, like, we're giving Blake a lot more business because a lot of people also now see this is how they can do it, right? And I think even the people that are already there and distributed, and now he can't actually do it. Because the way the law technically works is that he necessarily can't buy direct from somebody and sell it unless if it's not already distributed within inside of DC. And so now you've got other brands that said like, oh shit, we were there too early, and now we kind of like lost our percentage that we could have got out of this business model as well.
Yeah, it's just. It's tough because it is alcohol, and yes, we want to say let's open up shipping, let's do it secondary, but there is a lot of things that need to be well thought out and like implemented, and so like we just need some way for like let's work towards it versus like holding our ground either one way or the other. Like let's like not say that shipping we have to do it all that way or we have to know it. There's got to be a middle ground that we can make it work for everyone.
And one of the reasons why you may never see a middle ground is because you have like these large distribution companies, and that would require them working together in some ways, and that they may not want that.
Get on a Zoom call, figure it out.
But here's the truth of the matter, and is that eventually someone brings up that, well, how can you guarantee that a 16-year-old kid is not going to get the bottle off of the doorstep or whatever? And it doesn't matter. Like, you can have people sign for it. You can have anything. The minute that a shipped alcohol or something outside of the 3-tier system gets into a child's hands and something happens, it's over.
You're telling me like you never had a fake ID growing up.
That's just it. It's like, I will not confirm nor deny that. But I'm just saying that is their all That is always the go-to argument. Always. And they're like, we protect that. And here's the thing, is that they do to a small percentage, but you can go to any college bar, and you will find like underage people getting served almost all the time.
Or any high schooler whose cousin, goes and buys them booze and they meet in the parking lot. And
so here's a way, tech guy. Let's get a thumbprint on every bottle of alcohol that you have to guarantee that you're an adult.
Or it won't
something
open.
like that. Yeah.
It won't open? Oh, gosh.
Or it explodes in your hand if you're not.
That's going to be a tough one. And the other thing that we kind of also, as we're talking on the shipping topic as well, is, even Kentucky and the KDA, and they fought to get shipping at a lot of the distilleries that are around here where people can go and they can have their stuff
They want to be able to ship out, but they don't want stuff coming in.
It's a kind of oxymoron, but I also don't know exactly like what the stats or the details of it, like how much is it actually used, considering we can only ship to like 6 states or something, right? I mean, it's something ridiculously low.
Yeah, there's only 6 reciprocating, so it's like, I know a couple of distilleries don't even do it because they're like, I'm not going to waste my time on 6 states, or
have a shipping package center,
right?
And all that
Exactly.
stuff
Have set up all these resources to be able to just fulfill 6, states. But I know it's just surprising. Like I'm kind of confused. Like on one side we're embracing, the vintage law and all this stuff, and then on the other side we're, trying to limit shipping and secondary sale. It's all just like, it's typical politics. It's hypocritical.
Yeah,
It's
all of these laws, basically, they start out in one place, someone opposes it, and then it gets compromised and something gives up. And so that law where they could be shipped in.
It seems like all the laws are just geared, it's more favorable for the businesses and not the consumers. Like, I'm all for like distillers being able to serve more alcohol, sell more bottles on property, all that. Okay, that's great for them, but what about us consumers, who want to buy across state lines or
like
do,
there's not a, and if there was, it'd be small, but there's not a bourbon advocacy out there, us maybe.
Right.
But
we're not, I'm not signing checks to get whatever passed.
And
but
there's so many lobby groups in the distilling business, and there's the ADI, there's ACSA, there's Distilled Spirits Council, there's the President's Forum, there's Kentucky Distillers Association, there's Texas Whiskey Association. They're on and on and on and on and on, and they all tell their story and get what they want, try to get what they want, and it's not necessarily always what the consumer wants.
Yep, absolutely. So as we start rounding this out, there's one thing that I want us to do is like, what is your big prediction for 2020? Right?
Oh gosh,
and I know. And I'll go first, and I'll kind of set the ground, and you can kind of pick what you want. And it could be anything. It could be anything that you kind of see with inside of whiskey or bourbon or yourself or I don't know, whatever you want it to. But for me, one of the big things that happened this year, we were a part of it, being able to be on stage being at Bourbon and Beyond, being able to see the Van Winkles talk about the takedown of the secondary market. The secondary market, it's a part of the culture. It's a part of the bourbon culture. And I don't want to talk about it all the time, but it's definitely a part of what it is. There was one big sweep where groups kind of disappeared overnight. But in my opinion, that might be over. And I would venture to see that we will see the rise of a large secondary group once again in 2020.
Are you the admin?
I am not the admin. I do not have that much free time in my life, and I don't want to be. I don't want to be that.
Could you imagine the hate you get as a secondary market admin?
Oh gosh.
Oh yeah.
All the work for zero pay. No, thank you.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't sound good to me. But I mean, we're already kind of seeing it. There's groups already that are creating up to 8, 9, 10,000 people. So hitting 25, 50 probably might not be that far of a stretch here in 2020.
Yeah, and I like that prediction. What's your prediction for the year?
Oh gosh,
Put you on the spot there.
I don't know. I've thought about a few things. I still think like barrel programs are going to get reduced this year. I think they're going to stop and cut more single barrel opportunities for people. I think the distilleries see them as a headache and as a pain. And I'm always surprised. I leave there and I'm like, they let us do this, go and drink barrel proof whiskey and, go see you later.
It is still kind of magnificent,
It's one of the best things you do ever.
We've been doing this so long, and it's still like you're like a kid going to the candy store. It's just, I can't believe we do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think we'll see a reduction in them, and then you'll see. But with that, you'll see more product offerings from the distilleries.
Do you also think they're reducing outgoing because they're? I mean, let's face it. For a while, like Four Roses had. They're doing 2 barrels every single day. Like they've got to run an aged stock at some point,
Sure.
right? Do you think it's an aged stock issue, or do you think it's really just like an overhead issue?
I think it's a resource issue. I think they have the stock. I think they want to use the stock for because we're consumers of those brands already as a single barrel buyer. And so I just think they want to continue to grow the market and use that juice to help keep growing new consumers, because it's a pain in the ass for us to come there and, individually bottle all these. And I think they want to continue to grow that new consumer base.
Now, here's a question. You two have started to do a little private barrels yourself, right? For the Pursuit series. Can you all see yourself giving up some of your honey barrels for private barrel picks?
We've already started it. Yeah, we've done a few already. And, like I said, for us, we do it, it's very small, very boutique kind of way. So you're selecting stuff that we have already it's just like every other distillery, right? You go there, there's a tasting panel that's already selected the barrels. We've already selected the barrels. Now you finer grain and fine tune and choose that barrel. But again, we have a smaller amount of inventory, but we do it on a come as as needed basis.
Yeah.
So here's my prediction for 2020. I think you're going to see about 10 celebrities come into American whiskey. We saw a little trickle of them this year. I know of many who are coming in or asking around and looking, and that's why I started the best celebrity whiskey category for my awards, is because I want to be able to say I want people to come in if they're going to. I think it's great that celebrities are coming, first of all, because that brings more awareness to everything. But I want to make sure that...
And not just as spokespeople, but
Exactly.
as brands.
Owners.
Yes.
Owners, like majority in some cases. And the thing is they want to get involved. They want to pick the whiskey. And I want to reward that. I want to reward celebrities who are getting themselves involved. Like Clown from Slipknot, probably one of the top 5 bands in the world right now. Their new album was the first like hard rock album to be number 1. It like took off, and it took down Old Town Road or whatever. And
Town Road. My kids love that song.
Gonna drive my horse to Old Town Road. So he blended that whiskey. He blended it. And I'm sure he's not going around saying I'm a master blender or any of that crap, but I just think it's really cool that you see someone at that level getting their hands dirty a little bit. And the same with Matthew McConaughey. Like we see his kind of creative side, and he's very, very involved there and all that, but he legitimately participated in the creation of that whiskey. And I think that should be rewarded in some way. But so in the next year...
Do you think people take a brand like that more... They'll take it more seriously, or will they scoff at it because it's
our people will always scoff at it?
Yeah,
for sure, and even to an extent, all 3 of us will. But
it kind of goes. I totally agree with you, but I think it was. I think Kroger had a release of that Slipknot whiskey, and they only had, I don't know, I had only a couple hundred bottles or something like that, and they said like 2,000 people showed up for a signing day, like 2,000 people. Here just in Louisville.
Wow.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
Yeah, really, right? I mean, and that kind of just shows you the power of what these people can drive to this particular category.
Right. And I had a stage appearance with them at Louder Than Life. And, I had probably, in that big bourbon bar area and out, I probably had about 4,000 people just sitting there listening to me interview Clown. And so, yes, those people bring an audience to bourbon that we don't get otherwise. And here's the thing: is like we have this podcast. I have a magazine. I got other things, and like we want to educate people. We don't want people just kicking back and drinking. And if people can, if these celebrities can bring like consumers that would be going to vodka or tequila otherwise, and we can have an opportunity to like educate them, I'm all for that. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if we get more people that are even listening to this podcast, even better. Works out for me.
Yep.
So with that, I think that's going to wrap up our last show of 2019, our predictions for 2020. So fellas, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fantastic. Then we covered a lot of ground, some best whiskeys. I mean, did you have a best whiskey of 2019? I don't know if we actually said it.
I haven't. The first thing that pops in my mind is probably Old Forester birthday bourbon this year. It was really
so good.
Like, usually I scoff at birthday bourbon. I'm like, why do people care about it? It's, but this year it was pretty damn good. Like, it was so. I just my first reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of mine for myself is that it's one that's consistently been pretty mediocre for years, and this year it just rose. I really liked it, and it fit that. We were talking about earlier, it fit that profile that you kind of want to just have this like buttery caramel texture. And I'm not even able to get a bottle of it, but it was this year's Eagle Rare 17 for the media samples that we got.
That was like chocolate, sexy, velvety.
I was highly impressed with it. Even though I'll never see a bottle or get a bottle of it, I was very highly impressed with it. And then I think part of the everyday category, you already said kind of Old Forester rye. I'm going to go with Four Roses Small Batch Select. I still think it was
a fantastic
great
stuff.
entrance to this year. All right. With that, I want to say, guys, thank you again for coming on the show again today. It was great to have everybody here. We're going to start getting everything planned.
Now we got to get a syllabus and agenda.
I know. Now we have to really work.
Yeah.
Just to bring you more great content in 2020.
Actually, Ryan and I are about to get yelled at, guys. So
can't wait for this hazing session.
Pray for them. All right. Cheers, everybody. We'll see you all next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.